Welcome back to the Books Brothers podcast, the book club turned podcast where friends spread across the country reconnect through the pages of a book. Each week we dive into what we are reading, sharing our thoughts and perspectives, all while enjoying a few laughs along the way. Whether you're a big reader or you just enjoy listening to the discussion, join us as we explore interesting topics, narratives, and connect each week. I'm Adam.
I'm Adam.
I'm Garrett.
And I'm Matt.
We are currently reading through Gates of Fire, an epic novel of the Battle of Thermopylae by Stephen Pressfield. This week we read and are discussing Book 6, Dienekes. In this book, we finally have made it to the Battle of Thermopylae. We get introduced to the Persians in battle. They are a mixed match of people groups, former nations that have been conquered by Persia, who are now fighting for their conqueror. They include Medes, Assyrians, Babylonians, Arabians, Egyptians, and many others. The Spartans, fighting alongside many other Greek people groups, have significantly less numbers. During the battle, Xerxes sits upon his throne high on the cliffs above the narrow pass, watching the battle. The battle is extremely brutal. Bodies are piling up, and as the waves of new soldiers come in, they are forced to climb atop the dead bodies to fight. The very ground of the battlefield is churned up and covered in human flesh and fluids. In the early fighting, Dienekes loses an eye. Leonidas suffers 6 separate injuries and goes over 40 hours straight without sleep. Alexandros, his father, is killed. And Greeks send letters to family knowing it will likely be their final communication. In this section, one of the themes was of sacrifice and the stark comparison of the Greeks and the Persians. So during the battle, Xerxes, as I mentioned, sits on his throne, while Leonidas goes sleepless nights in battle. Persia sends other nations to do its fighting initially, while for Sparta it sends its best men. Xerxes' own Persian soldiers, the 10,000 immortals, which likely include relatives and friends of his, are not even sent into battle for many days. So, what are your guys' thoughts on this theme in this section, the theme of sacrifice?
So one thing that I thought was really cool in this book, in particular compared to the movie, is the level of preparation that goes into this battle. We didn't really talk about it last episode, but the preparation for war, the marching out, the sending off the party was way more realistic in this book than in the movie. You know, in the movie, they're just like, we got to go fight the Persians. And I'm just taking 300 bodyguards for a stroll to go meet the Persians, you know. But no, this book seems way more realistic. There's supply trains, there's squires, there's herdsmen, goats, animals for their sacrifices, supply trains. And they get to the hot gates and there's like vendors there set up selling food, there's bathhouses, all this stuff, and they send out scouts and stuff to look at the terrain, make sure there's no other path through the hot gates, and make sure that they're well prepared. In addition to, by my count, there is about 7,500 to 8,000 total soldiers in addition to the 300, because there's other Greek cities that came to fight with them. So all these people are preparing to die for their country, and they all pretty much know that they're going to die because the Persian army is just absolutely massive. And we learn in the book that they send out this small army of that many people just to try to delay the Persians for a little bit so that the rest of the Greek army can get marshaled, get mustered up, and come join the war. They just didn't have enough time for everyone to go out there. But I think it's really courageous. And I really do admire our armed forces, people who go and fight for our country and put themselves on the line. I really respect that. And I'm very thankful for that. And I think if I were put in the position of fighting for your country, I would probably want to go fight so that my family can go live a free life and not be slaves or murdered or whatever is going to happen to them. I would want to fight for them. So I really admire the way their sacrifice in this book is portrayed, but they do a lot of work. They do a lot of prep for it. And they rebuild that Phocian wall on the eve of battle, which in the movie, again, it's just like some rocks and dead bodies piled up, and then they push it over, which in the book, they kind of describe something similar, but it's not the same. They like actually have a wall like a castle wall is how I envision it. Yeah, if you're going to sacrifice for something, it takes a lot of effort, and there should be a good reason for you to be sacrificing for it.
Yeah. Garrett mentioned this a little bit in the last episode, but really we see kind of this juxtaposition between Xerxes and King Leonidas in that, essentially Persia, they're sending these other people groups out initially. And so it's like they're not fighting for their land. They're fighting for they're a slave to this other people group or this other country now, and they're fighting for that country. Whereas the Greeks are fighting for the freedom. They're fighting for their life. And so I think with that, to me, it's like that's, King Leonidas, he kind of gives this inspiring speech where he's basically says, we have so much more to fight for than these people, and essentially inspires his men by the mission behind their fighting.
Yeah, the only real people that Xerxes even cares about is the immortals, because they're his friends and family. There's like friends and relatives in the 10,000 immortals or whatever, but he doesn't really care about any of these other people. So they're just like being sacrificed for what?
No.
For this dude. They're just being sacrificed. They're not being sacrificed for freedom.
Yeah. So I think with that, our level of sacrifice seems to correlate with the level of effort that we'll put into something. So, if we really have to sacrifice for something, we're going to put a lot more effort in. How have you guys seen this play out in your own lives?
I think like with work in the past, I have gotten like in the zone of I'm going to do really well at this and kind of put blinders on and like be really hyper focused on this one thing, get really good at it, kind of neglect other areas. Like is easier for me to do because I'm not married, but maybe sacrificing like a relationship or something in order just to put more energy into my job. That's the one thing I can think of that I've done in the past for sure. Or never-ending pursuit of strength. Sacrificing everything else to pursue some sort of goal. In hindsight, kind of silly, but yeah, a ton of effort. I mean, put a ton of effort into things in the past that sacrificed areas of my life that are probably more important in hindsight.
I'm thinking of high school basketball, oddly enough. I didn't make the freshman team.
The glory days.
Really?
The glory days. Yeah. And I really wanted to make the team.
Because you're ginger?
Because I wasn't good. And I think it's a good example of you can't have success on your own. My parents were very supportive and put me in summer leagues, and it was a lot of time and a lot of sacrifice. And I ended up making the teams the next few years. And there was a correlation with the effort and the time sacrificed that resulted in some positive outcome. I think more modern day, just present day, it's probably things very similar. And I've talked about it before. You make time for what you prioritize. So the things that you sacrifice for, you're going to spend more effort doing, and there's going to ideally be the fruits of your labor. So I think of marriage. I mentioned in the last episode that there had been lots of no shortage of hard times and hard experiences, but continuing to choose to act out of a sense of duty and sacrificing for the family unit. And we've seen a lot of fruit from that effort of working through things and having a really good marriage.
Garrett, what you said reminds me of something that our pastor says on a somewhat regular basis. And so he says, show me what they're spending their expenses on. It's like, show me their checkbook. Obviously, it's like a dated reference, but show me their checkbook and show me their planner. And that will tell me what your priorities are. Like, what are you spending money on? What are you spending time on? And so those are our main resources. And so whatever we're spending kind of these things on, it's like, that's what we put our value in. And, I think for me, one that like something that I think of when I was coming out of these questions is I recall times about 6 years ago, Ruth and I were having some conflict that was caused by me. And I remember during this time period, it wasn't great. And so I normally have a lot of hobbies. I run, I read, I play music, I like to get together with friends, I like to hike. And I remember in that time period, I just like pretty much dropped all of those because ultimately, like what was most important to me, or one of the most important things to me, was my marriage. And so when I saw that was in jeopardy, I was like, okay, I need to like shift focus, like give all my effort and time to this. It is in this section that we learn that Xeones also got to see Diomache again. He is sent on an unknown errand by Dienekes to Athens just before leaving for Thermopylae. Here he is surprised to be reacquainted with Diomache. Now 24, she is married with 2 young girls, but it seems that life has been hard for her. She appears to look 40 and is living in a place for women to live who are penniless and have been put out by their husbands. She has lost her former youthful beauty, and it seems that her life did not pan out the way she imagined it to. She shares with Xeones a vision that she had during a near-death experience years ago. She notes that she saw a goddess standing over her. The goddess had a veil on, and when she removed it, Diomache states that what she saw was beauty beyond beauty. She saw that this extreme beauty as being alone real, more real than anything else on earth. She felt that this beauty she perceived was always with us, but we are too blind to see it. Through this vision, she perceived that her role on earth, the shadowed and sorrow-bound side of the veil from the vision, was to embody those qualities that arise from beyond and are on both sides of the veil. Those qualities being selflessness, compassion, and love. She notes that this goddess that she saw was Persephone, the Greek goddess who was captured and forced to marry Hades, god of the underworld. Persephone was forced to live half of her time roaming the earth, and the other half with Hades in the underworld. Diomache states that it is this goddess whose mystery she serves. Xeones' time with Diomache ends with him asking her to run away with him. She refuses, accepting her current lot in life, stating, "We are where we must be, and we will do what we must." So, what are your guys' thoughts on this interaction?
First off, what does put out by their husbands mean?
So, from my understanding, and correct me if any of y'all see this differently, but basically this is a place where it's like, it's women who never got married, or women who were married and were essentially deemed to be like unfit by their husband, or that husband maybe no longer desired her. Or there's some that even they even referenced it to be almost kind of like an asylum in a sense.
I'm really glad that we got to see some more of Diomache because she's been mentioned throughout the book. It's pretty sad that this is how her life ended up. She's basically in a convent with her kids and has really no hope for ever getting married again because she's still technically married, I think, but her husband just never comes and sees her. And so she's just devoted her life to the goddess Persephone. But I think it's good we got some closure between her and Xeones' desires, really. When I was reading it, I was like, I'm hoping they end up together somehow. I know it's not going to happen because we already know the story based on the first few pages of the book. But you still, as a reader, you hope that they get together because of Xeones' love for her.
And to that note, so do you agree with Diomache's perception of the world?
No, I don't. Because I don't believe in Greek mythology and their gods.
Easy combo. All right, I'll be a little contrarian because I feel like the emotion, since we were talking last episode about emotion and love and duty, the old duty. And I just like, okay, emotionally, it's like, oh man, they're back together. First off, back then was just population so much smaller that it's just normal to want to marry your cousin.
Well,
I'm not
depending
being
on
funny.
what state you live in, it's still normal.
No. I'm being serious. Like, is it?
I think that would
just
have probably
normal
been like
back then?
even a good thing in that period. Like you're like, oh, keeping the bloodline clean.
I think it is more acceptable back in the day.
Yeah. Okay. And then, but the previous book, Dienekes, talks about fear and how the women like are fear. I don't know. We talked about all that, and he is married, and he's Dienekes' squire who lied about having an affair, and everyone's like, no, this is the most upright guy. Like, he is the squire to the most upright dude in Sparta. And on a whim, he's like, let's go and get married. And you leave your husband. I mean, I know her situation's different, but he's like married with 2 young kids. So as on the emotional side, like I think like his desire is good in the sense that he wants to rescue his cousin from this hellhole. Fully on board with that. But you don't have to like, let's go back to the woods when we were kids and just like be savages again. And so I'm glad Diomache said no for multiple reasons. But it was like, hey, why don't you come back to Lake Daemon with me and like live in my house and raise your kids in a safe place or something like that. You know, I just, as much as I was, yes, the romance side of the story. And yeah, it was absolutely heartbreaking. Again, this book is like very sad. Like there's a lot of like good things to glean, but most people are dead or in a state of dying. Like she's just had a very traumatic life. Her parents are murdered. She was brutally gang raped, and then she kind of gets screwed by her husband and is in an asylum. So it just made me really sad. And at the same time, I don't want to necessarily be like, oh man, I wish she had said yes. Cause it's like, wait a minute. Then I'm happy that he isn't fulfilling his duty to his own wife. Do you get what I mean? Like there's some conflict. There's some tension.
For sure.
You just reminded me that in the previous book, Arete was talking to Xeones and telling him to go see his cousin. She was telling him, almost ordering him to leave his wife and go actually leave the war also, to run away, to go and be with his cousin and get married to her. And she was kind of offended when he said to her that would be dishonorable.
Yeah.
And then we see him actually in person with Diomache, and he completely changes his mind in the moment after he sees her. Maybe it's just the childhood emotions that got brought up, the nostalgia, seeing her in person, but he's a different person when he sees her. His choices are different based on what he said to Arete versus when he's with Diomache.
Well, yeah, so, I mean, I feel like it's like
interesting.
And they're still trying to, they're trying to force that to happen. But yeah, obviously, it's easy to see. It's like, yeah, if the situation's in front of you, like emotions will often trump the more noble cause or more the noble hope. But I think, Matt, I know your perception, you don't agree at all with her. But I thought what I really kind of liked about that interaction character is just the level of contentedness and really this concept that she brings up. It's that life is very hard and there's a lot of hard things that happen, but like it doesn't mean that there's not like these eternal things that like these kind of glimpses of really it's like glimpses of glory, of like glimpses of something better. And as a Christian, I believe that concept, that the idea that, and obviously this is kind of looking at it from a different worldview, different perspective, but the idea that, there's a lot of messiness in the world, but yet there still can be these very beautiful things that happen. And this beauty is always around us. And, when I say this beauty, this goodness really is kind of what we're talking about. And I think that, from this interaction, him wanting her and her kind of shutting down, it's like the idea, the importance of contentness. And like, she feels a responsibility to her life that she's had this far, a responsibility to her husband that has left her. And she too, for him, feels that he has a responsibility to fight still.
Yeah, I should have clarified. I don't agree with her worldview, but I do agree with a lot of the concept that we are to embody the good things. There's a spiritual realm versus earthly realm. And as Christians, we are supposed to embody those good qualities and bring them to the side of the veil, in her words.
I love that imagery. Like this, I think, what was the exact quote? The shadowed and sorrow-bound side of the veil. That's what we're living in.
I do think we are in our places for a reason. Call it fate, call it providence, whatever. But I think overall where we are in life is part of a bigger plan.
So last thing I wanted to discuss regarding book 6 was on leadership. So in this section, we see various examples of leadership. Dienekes comforts Alexandros as he falls into his lap weeping after the first day of battle. King Leonidas inspires his men to battle for country and family. Dienekes asks Alexandros for forgiveness in the former ways that he treated him. And Dienekes in the way that he encourages men when other Greeks start to desert the battle. So did any of these examples of leadership stick out to you guys in particular? And what character traits do you feel are most important in a leader?
Dienekes, because the reverse psychology and the foresight, it was like just incredible, where he calls everybody else out. Like, hey, you all are just as afraid, and you all have had the same thoughts of running back home to your mommies. So don't just like cry out for blood when you've felt the same way. And then someone's like, well, yeah, but we've stayed. And he's like, yeah, you know what? You're right. You guys have stayed. Good for you. So let's watch these guys leave. How shameful is that? You know, going back to the dishonor, like it's worse to be dishonorable than it is to be alive. And like watching them leave. And then he's like, everyone else who's here wants to be, and then Leonidas was the one that almost followed Dienekes' suit. And he's like, he stopped having guards at the end of the encampment so that people could desert if they wanted to. So he's like, all right, Dienekes let those three go. I guess we should just stop trying to patrol these guys. But the idea, it was the foresight of, we know who's here to fight. We don't have any people who are half in, half out. If you want to leave, you can leave. And I just thought that was brilliant, because logic would say, no, you have to exert your control. You have to be in authority and control this how you want it to be. But similar to the Xerxes, where people are just kind of fighting because they're kind of forced to, or, or else
that's a good point.
Which side of the fear of coin are you going to play? And it's like, you can leave. It's going to be super dishonorable, or you can stay. And you know that if you're staying, that makes that bond even tighter with that group. And that just was an incredible scene.
Did anybody see the quote on page 281 where it says, "The best service only for you, my foreskin"? That's all I have to add tonight.
Weka to these. You remember that part?
There's so many stories, like, when they were swimming in the lake and they're like, hey, I'm going to marry this girl. And it's like, they're just teenage boys talking about girls, and like a bunch of grown men. And it's like, they're just a bunch of guys with, just like today or whatever. It's like, I'm sure there are examples, but in the fraternity, a guy who wasn't in the fraternity, but would like come around during rush, or was one of the guy's friends and was just like hilarious that everyone liked. You know what I mean? Like, oh yeah, you're part of the crowd, even though you're not a member or whatever, just because you're just so funny or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's what it made me think of, where it's like, this guy's part of the group. This guy's hilarious because of that one embarrassing thing.
Yeah. I really like Leonidas, how he's portrayed in this book. He's just an incredible leader, incredible warrior. He is so smart, but so down to earth, humble, but also inspiring. And reading about him in the actual battle. Oh, actually, even before the battle, when they were trying to decide how and where to build the wall, to rebuild that wall. And all these engineers, all these architects are arguing about the best place to put it, which angle to put it at. And Leonidas just takes off his shirt and starts stacking stones. He didn't say anything. He just walks up, starts stacking stones in a spot. And then everyone is silent, just watching him. And someone from the crowd is like, are you guys going to let him build this all by yourself? Get to it. Let's get to work. And then he's walking around the camp and talking to everyone that he's close to, learning their names, telling jokes, even people who are not a part of the Spartan army, the other Greek cities. He's learning their names. He's being very friendly to them and inspiring courage. He's so inspiring. And it's just an awesome example of servant leadership from someone that people really look up to. Obviously, he's king, so people are going to listen to him no matter what, but he does it in such a humble way. It's really cool. What did you guys think of this book? This book 6? I thought it was so incredible, just being in the details of the war.
I was telling Adam, personally, I struggle to visualize this, like these battle scenes. I was telling him I kind of tend, in my mind, I make the imagery a lot smaller. Like, it's hard for me to imagine thousands of people fighting. And it's because, like, you only hear a couple names, so I can only visualize that. But I mean, they're definitely, like, painting the picture of a very grotesque battlefield, dead bodies and the smell and all these kind of things. It definitely makes it more vivid.
Yeah, for sure. I really liked how real it seems. So all of the different Greek cities, all the different armies, they go in different, like, boxing rounds is how they describe it. They go in for a few minutes at the front line, and then after they're spent, after just a few minutes, because they're fighting for their lives, literally spending everything they have, getting to the point of exhaustion. And then after a few minutes, or it might be hours, I think it starts off as a few minutes, and then one of the other cities comes in and takes their spot on the front line. And that first group gets a rest for a little bit. But then as the day goes on and the war starts dragging on for the next day, and they start losing more and more men, the time intervals are basically nothing. They have time to just maybe get something to drink, but then they are too exhausted to even go get food or get something to drink. They're just lying on the ground and they can't hardly move. And then they have to get back up and fight again. It's just incredible. It's insane. And I was trying to think of something that would be similar to today. I couldn't really think of anything because modern warfare, people don't fight like that anymore.
Yeah.
People aren't face to face.
Yeah. Maybe the pacer test that we all used to have to do.
Map testing.
The closest thing I could think of is football. Like, if you were on the offensive line or defensive line and it was just nonstop for an entire day. No timeouts, no dead plays. The play just goes on for an entire day. That's how I imagine it.
Yeah. You know, you say this, Matt, I think I just came up in my mind with a new sport. So it's wrestling. But instead of just 2 people in the ring, there's like 6. It's like team wrestling. You've got all your weight classes all in the ring.
Let's try it out.
We can do that on the retreat.
I'd watch
3
it.
versus
3v3.
Yeah.
There's some parts in this that are like similar to the movie, I think. Like some of the comedy that Leonidas says, like when he's talking about, he does one of his speeches and he's like, brothers and allies, my own beautiful dogs from hell. And he says, like, we stand already in hell. It is our home.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Like, I think he says something similar in the movie.
Yeah.
We saw, I think it was the last book where Dienekes says he's talking to one of the people who are trying to convince them to stand down. He's like, the arrows will block out the sun. It's like, good, then we'll fight in the shade.
Yeah, that's in the movie.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, Olympius and is it Polynices, the father-son? There's the father and son combo. And or no, it was the guy with his hand cut off. Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Although in the movie, the son gets killed first.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Books Brothers podcast. Join us next time as we discuss Book 7, Leonidas, from the book Gates of Fire by Stephen Pressfield. If you haven't yet, there's still time to get the books. You can follow along with us. If you have enjoyed listening or benefited from our conversation, please subscribe, give us a review, and share with a friend that you want to connect with. Lastly, we really have loved getting feedback from you all and hearing from you all. all. If you want to connect with us, you can reach us by email at connect@booksbrotherspodcast.com or on Instagram at booksbrotherspodcast. Until next week, read, reflect, and connect.